Saw an old man in a veteran's hat at the service station pumping his gas. Pulled up beside him, blaring B-side.
Hello and welcome to Telling It Like It Is, UJ Extension and Southeast District's newest source for local, unbiased, research-based information about Georgia's #1 industry, agriculture. And today we have a really cool episode. But before we get to that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself again. My name is Blake Carter. I'm the Effingham County Ag Agent.
I'm Savannah Tanner, the Emanuel County Agent.
And I'm going to actually let Savannah kind of do the honors of introducing our guest today and kind of setting us up for our topic. But we're going to talk a little bit about beef cattle and some horses as we go and some grazing. But I'll pass it on to her and let her kind of get us going.
So this year, coming out of staying in a pretty significant drought in Emanuel County, we've struggled with winter grazing. We had some later planted crops, so if we have row crop guys that are also grazing cattle, we've still got a lot of crops in the field and trying to get those squared away, which also delays our grazing going into it. But then also what we have been able to get planted, if it was not irrigated, has struggled to come up. Some of it we've replanted, some of it has came up and then died, and so we'll be replanting soon. We're kind of getting in that latter part of it. In our part of the state, we can technically plant winter grazing on into December the 15th or so. That's usually getting a little late, but so hopefully we'll get some rain and can get some things planted. But I think that kind of stresses the importance for us as producers to manage our grazing and manage what we have planted even more critically, because we want to be able to utilize the most efficiency or utilize that grazing so that we have the most efficiency and the most sustainability within the crop that we planted to make us the most profitable. And that can be a struggle when you're replanting pretty regularly. And so one of the things that we do is rotationally graze, and I think in our neck of the woods we struggle with that a little bit. I don't know about our two guest speakers, but we do have Brenda Jackson with us from Murray County, and then we have Hailey Partain with us from Upson and Lamar counties. They are both new to the Georgia Forage Extension team, and so we're excited to have them. But Hailey, Brenda, can you talk about a little bit about rotational grazing and what it looks like to an operation and maybe some of the benefits of it?
Now, y'all both don't speak at the same time now.
Now, really. So, rotational grazing is, literally just what it sounds like. You will start in one paddock for, depending on your stocking rate and your forage availability, they could be there for a couple of days or even up to a week before they move on to the next location. Rotational grazing for horses is going to be a little bit different from what it would be for cattle. For cattle, they will pretty much, if it's green and growing, they are going to chew it down and, be ready to move on. Horses are a little bit more selective in their grazing. They will pick and choose what they prefer taste-wise first, and will leave some of those forages that they don't like as well until the last possible minute. Horses are heavy-bodied animals. They are also, their grazing habits, they're very mobile in their mouth, their lips, their teeth, that type of thing. They will sometimes grab a plant all the way down to the ground and rip the whole plant up instead of just biting the fresh leaves off. So horses are a lot harder on their grazing pastures than cattle are. So you have to take some of those grazing behaviors into consideration as well.
So I'm located in middle Georgia. So Brenda's up in way north Georgia. So our grazing, kind of like Savannah, we have a little bit longer that we can put stuff in the ground. In my area too, we've got large producers, we've got medium-sized producers, we've got small producers. Some of our small producers, not only do they rotationally graze their cattle, sometimes they'll actually throw their horses in there too with it. We've also had it where some of them have started incorporating either their sheep or goats, so that it's, like Brenda said, horses are going to be more selective, cattle not so much, but goats are going to be even less. So a lot of times when we have those multi-species out there, they'll kind of graze up everything. What we've noticed in our area, and I know it's all over Georgia, is that we do rotational grazing. We talk about stocking rates, but it all depends on the forage that's available out there. So that's why there's a range from how many days they can be on this pasture versus that pasture versus that pasture, because it's just based off of the forage that's readily available out there.
So that brings up a good question, Hailey. Actually, I'm going to throw in a statistic that I really like to talk about when I'm talking about rotational grazing. So continuous grazing is you're going to only get about 30 to 40% of that crop that's out there. And what continuous grazing is we've got one paddock, maybe two, and we just leave them on it until we don't have anything else, and then we move it or just feed hay. So if we're only getting 30 to 40% of it, we certainly need to be more efficient in how we use it. Whereas if we're rotationally grazing, you increase that to up to 60 to 70% of what we actually have out there, which is cool to me to know that. But to bring up the point, Hailey, tell me a little bit more about some of the maybe benefits to rotational grazing outside of the increased forage use. So I know sometimes, especially with maybe multi-species, you've got some parasite controls or maybe even some erosion help and things like that. Can we talk a little bit more about the benefits to that?
So I don't know how many of y'all out there have issues with weeds, but really what is the best benefit in our area is that rotational grazing allows for the weed control to go down. Does that mean all weeds are going to go away? Absolutely not. But a lot of times they'll lessen. We can go and you can focus more on the forages that are supposed to be out there. For those that are for or against, it really doesn't matter your own personal preference on herbicides. A lot of times rotational grazing, you can incorporate your herbicides and it not be an issue. I've got some dairy producers that call and say, hey, I need to spray this out here on my weeds. What is the grazing restriction on it? A lot of times it's 14 days or more. And so rotational grazing actually allows for them to incorporate that into their operation and not have an issue with, hey, I've got to move this here or there.
I am going to put a side note in. Hailey doesn't have to worry about our row crop producers quite as much. I do want to caution all of our row crop producers when we're grazing pasture and hay land and maybe doing our winter grazing on our row crop land, we have to be very strategic and very conscientious about some of the herbicides that we use. So for an example of that, if we've put Graze On out on a hay field and then we move them to a peanut field where we've put winter grazing, we can actually have an issue with maybe our peanuts or cotton coming up next year. So do want to caution you guys on that, but that goes back into making a plan and being prepared for that. So
another grazing consideration when you're specifically talking about horses, all herbivores are not built alike. Herbivore or horses don't have a rumen like cattle do, so they're not able to digest and make use of some of the poor quality forages, excuse me, like cattle can. But then also there are certain forages that are not recommended specifically for horses. If you have brood mares, it's better not to use like a Kentucky 31 fescue or something like that because of the fescue toxicosis issues that can crop up with brood mares. As well, sorghums such as Sudan grass and Johnson grass can contribute to cystitis issues in horses, and not only the prussic acid issues and things like that can cause muscle weakness problems in horses, urinary tract failure, neural degeneration, and eventually even death.
And I think that's a good point. I was going to ask, some preferences on types of species when we're talking about this rotational grazing. There's this, multi-species grazing is such a big push, and there's so many good benefits for it. But when we're talking about these different species, some may, not only are you considering what the benefit for each one of those types of cover crops to the land itself, but we're also thinking about what the animals would prefer, what's best for them. You were talking about how picky horses were. Do you have some of your favorite mixes, or what's a buffet for a horse? What are they going out there licking their chops ready for? And Hailey, if you could talk about beef in just a second too, but horses first.
So horses are really very, if it's tender and green, they'll go for it. Sometimes even to their detriment, really.
Gotcha.
There are some, digestive issues. On that new green clover, they can super salivate and get what they call the slobbers and that type of thing. For cool season grasses, fescue, orchard, and timothy are all good options. For warm season grasses, a lot of folks don't think that horses will eat Bermuda grass, but they will. The problem can sometimes come with the South Georgia areas is the sandier soils. Yep. If they do, like I said, where they're ripping up the whole plant and they're eating sand, they can sometimes get some colic from sand compaction and that type of thing. It's not that the Bermuda grass is bad for them, it's more the dehydration issue. So as long as they have plenty of water available, those warm season grasses are going to be good for them. Horses will they eat, I won't say they eat more than cattle, but they eat longer than cattle. A horse will spend about 80% of its time eating, so from dawn to dusk. Now if it's super hot outside, they will likely hang out in the shade during the heat of the day, and though they don't typically eat overnight, if it's hot in the summertime, they will go out and graze at night. They will basically, and they, like I said, they'll go for that forage maturity. They prefer immature leafy forages. They do not like to graze in areas where the herd has been eliminating. So they will avoid fecal elimination sites. So you may end up with a patchy pasture where you've got some really tall grass in specific areas because they won't graze there. It's not because there's anything wrong with the forage there, it's just that was their latrine, and so they avoid that spot.
Are there any techniques or anything to kind of help eliminate? Because I'm thinking if they do that, and there's areas maybe in smaller paddocks where it could be a larger percent of that area that's not being grazed. Is there ways to get them to go through that, or are they very stubborn? Where it's like, stubborn like a mule is a thing for a reason.
It is a thing for a reason, and horses are very individualized in their bathroom habits is the best way that I can think to put it. I have seen some animals, and it's more in like a paddock or a stall situation. Yep. They will pick a favorite corner.
Right.
And that is where they will eliminate everything and then keep the rest of their area clean. But then you've got others that will just drop it everywhere and spread it indiscriminately, which is not necessarily a bad thing because, those are nutrients that are being returned to the soil that way. There are drags that you can get for paddock and pasture situations to drag out that manure and break down those latrine areas. Mowing also will help scrape it, spread it, and improve those areas. But yeah, they pick their favorite spots.
That makes sense. Now, what about the beef side? Now, are there some? What's your go-to mix? I mean, because I if you talk to anybody that does cover crops, they have their go-to, and that is what they live by. So, what would you, for a grazing scenario? I said cover crop, but grazing scenario, same plants, different usage. But what's your favorite? What do you like to go to?
So in our area, and I know they say there's certain crops that we should and should not use, in Middle Georgia, we're able to use most of them, so that's kind of a benefit to us. For cattle, what they like in our area, it seems, that grows well, is crabgrass. I mean, it's candy, right? A lot of my producers, if they're doing a grazing operation and they're rotating them around, they don't want to bush hog. They don't want to do any of that. So Bahia grass is very low maintenance. You kind of put it out there and it kind of fends for itself, so that's a good one. A lot of times we incorporate clover, but with cattle, you got to be prepared prepared that if you get a lot of clover out there, if your pasture's over 50%, there's the potential for bloat. And we've had that. Actually had a producer that we worked for 3 years to get rid of clover because all of his pastures had over 85% in it. With on the herbicide side, they'd say graze on next, we'll take care of all of it. Well, it took 3 years for it to take care of it to get down to a manageable standpoint. A lot of times people will put wheat out there. It seems to be more cost effective right now than some of the other varieties. Ryegrass is very common in our area. And fescue, I know a lot of folks don't like fescue because it can pop hot, but we do have a lot of fescue pastures just because it does well. We're trying to get people to kind of renovate and go towards the more non-toxic varieties like your Max Q and things like that. But if it's there, some people just don't have the financial standpoint to be able to renovate it, so they might incorporate some other grasses out there. Big thing when I talk to producers, like I've got one that's doing the Equine program, and we're trying to plan out their forages for them, is saying, okay, what do you have? What do you want to have out there? And what's going to benefit you as a producer? I mean, do you need to renovate the whole thing, or no, let's just add some varieties out there? If you never want to turn this pasture into hay, then let's turn it into grazing. It can be utilized differently.
Yeah, and I know we all are itching to talk, so I'm gonna say my piece real fast. But I think it's kind of building off of that. When in some of these varieties, the cows might not be accustomed to eating yet or grazing. It might take them to be introduced to it and take a little time for it to get there. But I do think I've seen it out at Honey Ridge when we've tried some of the different mixed species. But it is also an air of caution to think about your purpose of that field, right? So because like ryegrass and the length, it could overlap with things, right? And that's something to really consider, especially if you're trying to come in and do, maybe in I'm thinking like a cover crop scenario where they're bringing it in and using it for that purpose. But I know you also have to think about that from an animal standpoint as well. Savannah, do you want to add some more to that?
So one thing that you made a point of is that certain animals like certain things at certain times, and one of those things that I think about that can really be a benefit, obviously we don't want to plant it alone, is going to be some of our brassicas, turnips, rape, things like that. If you have a real compacted field, you can incorporate those into your traditional winter grazing things like oats, ryegrass, triticale, things like that, and it'll actually help break up that hard pan. But cows specifically have to be trained to eat them, and those should at some point, and I don't really know what point it is, but at some point that plant will produce a certain amount of sugars, and cows will eat it like candy. But they don't always want to graze it regularly, so we do recommend mixing it in as a mix, so that you're not only got that one thing out there, but it's an incredible opportunity to break up some compaction, and again to kind of figure out what you're going to be doing in that soil. So maybe you're transitioning from a grazing scenario to a row crop field, but you don't have your cows out there just yet. That may be a good opportunity to break up some of that compaction going into maybe a row crop scenario. As far as the ryegrass goes, we overseed our hayfield every year with oats because we'll come in and bale them. Sometimes, if you're not careful, especially if you buy bulk oats, you will get some ryegrass in there, and it can certainly be problematic going into a hay season when you have ryegrass that doesn't die out until the end of March or so you may miss the first cutting. Now, on my operation, I'd rather have a cutting of ryegrass than I had a cutting of Bermuda grass, but that's just me, so that can be a thing. But going on into it, I guess, what are some of the tools that are available, maybe from the NRCS side of things when they reopen, maybe from the UGA forage team side of things, or maybe it's just from a county agent side of things. What can we do, or what does UGA have available to producers that can encourage some of this grazing maximization?
So I'm going to answer on the NRCS side, and then I'm going to give it to Brenda, and she can answer on all the rest of the sides. But because because I'm currently working with a farm. So we had a beef cattle series. This producer and his wife went to Beef Cattle 101 and 201, and they are the prime example of they listened to what the Extension Service told them to do. They started out at the perfect time and have gone through every single phase, and now they're on their second round of the EQIP program through NRCS. So what I do with that is I'm not the initial person, right? They do that with NRCS. They sit down, they come up with a game plan, then they bring me in. We ride around their pastures. We decide what their end goal is, and then what forages should go out there, what kind of weed control should go out there, and kind of touch on every aspect that's been incorporated through NRCS. Then myself, NRCS, and those producers meet back and say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is our game plan. Does it fit within the application that was submitted?
So being the only one in the group from North Georgia, a lot of these plans work well. Most of my farmers actually, consider all of those brassicas and everything that Savannah talked about. That's hunting plots.
Yeah.
They don't graze that type of thing. I mean, and, as far as we have heavy clay soils.
Yep.
And traditionally, North Georgia has been, the southern edge of the fescue belt. So, but I have been talking more and more with my farmers, and even with my homeowners for their home lawns, is to consider alternatives. Maybe have, part as fescue and another part, another pasture or hayfield that's Bermuda, just so that they have something available year round. Primarily because, even, in my own personal lawn and, and the hayfield next door, it's green in the spring, the fescue comes on, it looks really great until about the 4th of July. For the last several years since I've been in North Georgia, we literally get our last rainfall on the 4th of July, and we don't see rain again until Labor Day if we're lucky. Fescue is going to give up the ghost at that point. Most of our warm season grazing is going to basically go dormant. So I will talk to folks, maybe you have a fescue pasture available, and then you have another pasture that's going to be in crabgrass or something like that, so you have a warm season annual available. Or else, we'll talk about, if they prefer, the Bermudas, the warm season perennials, then some sort of cool season annual available to them in the winter, just so that they have something available year round.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think the one thing I do want to mention that we've kind of touched on earlier, when you're coming up with this, it really does make a difference to make a plan. And why I say that is I'm thinking of herbicide and weed control options. If you had to, the different species and using that in the wintertime, it does help with that weed suppression, and that is very true. I got a lot of people that are finicky and they want their pastures completely clean. If it's not something they put out there, they don't want it. When you're coming up with these mixed species options, you limit sometimes your available chemicals that you can use out there for weed control. I'm thinking broadleafs, I'm thinking those brassicas. So if you're incorporating those things, you have to know that and go ahead and have that in your mind. Like, you're limiting, if there was a weed problem, you have got to be able to bite the bullet that year and choke it down and tough it out, because there's just not a whole lot of stuff you can really do to solve that in an in-season problem. But Hailey, go ahead.
So kind of going back to what Savannah had asked on some of how we can service the producer or the homeowner. So with University of Georgia Extension, I'm sure y'all are all aware of this because we all love Extension and all the things, right? Is we do soil sampling, right? Yep. So we can tell you what's in the ground and what needs to go into the ground. We can actually, I don't have one in my office, some county agents do. I know there's specialists that'll come out because they've done it for me before, but we can test the compaction that's out there. We can test for, say you're going to put out some seed. I've got a lot of producers. I even have a seed company in town that they'll test their purity and germination. That doesn't go through our office, but our office sends it to Georgia Department of Ag. So we can test how clean the seed is and if it's going to produce. We can test we can go pull samples out in the field. We can pull hay samples. We can pull just regular samples of grass and see what they're working with. We can pull nitrates. I mean, there's lots of different things that we can test as the Extension Office that a lot of people just think all you do is soil and you can't help anywhere else. We can. It's just setting up those conversations, setting up those site visits, seeing, hey, this is what we want. This is our plan. How can we help execute it? And that's where, like the four of us that are on here, I mean, we're all county agents. We know where to start and where to go from it.
And there's a lot lot of opinions, a lot of misinformation, things that might have worked one year that doesn't work continuously. It's not necessarily based in research out there. When you start to try to look up what's the best for an animal, what's the best grazing method for an animal, there are a lot more opinions than fact out there, and you have to be careful. And that's why I think Extension, we fit that mold of being able to have that unbiased research backing. That really helps that. So I definitely just want to echo that. We have all those services, but we're also there to provide just some experience and insight from our side of things and our view, what we're seeing other producers are seeing in our area. That local knowledge piece, I think, is super, super important for us. But you're itching to go again. What you got?
So my favorite thing is whenever I've gone out and done site visits and met with a producer, and then we've probably met maybe 5 different times, and then on our 6th visit, and they're trying to start something new for that year, but they come in and say, this is what I want to do, this is my plan, what do you think? And they say exactly what I would have said because they listened and they're doing, and they've kind of taken in everything that Extension has given them. So that just makes me happy. Is all I have to do is say, yes, good job, you got it. I don't even have to tell them anything because they already know what they're doing.
And sometimes the proof's in the pudding, and that's the other benefit for us is if a grower comes in and they might say, you know what, I don't believe this yet, but I'm interested. We do a really good job of being able to do those research trials and prove what works, what doesn't. And sometimes it works best. I always tell people, put their blinders on when it comes to lawn care management. Don't look at your neighbor's lawn when you're looking at your lawn for how to solve the problems. Same concept with this. You got to put your blinders on. You got to think about your what works for you might not work for your neighbor and vice versa. So sometimes it does take that trial and error piece. And I think that's something that we also get to work with our producers on and we really enjoy.
And the thing to remember is, we're working with grass here. We do need to plan ahead. I love those client calls where they contact me. What do you think about this? And they've talked to others. They've listened to what I've had to say, and they have a plan in place to help them to succeed for that season. The calls that I hate to get are, when do I plant fescue? And I give them the answer, and my husband did it last week. Yep. And it's May, and, that's just typically not the best time to plant fescue. But if you don't do your research, you don't know.
Well, with Extension, I always joke, or we always joke about it, but I tell my farmers this, the answer is always, it depends. And it depends on so many factors that we have zero control on, but then it also depends on 100 factors that we do have a little bit of control with. And so it just depends on, what you're doing, what your goals are, maybe the things you don't want in there, maybe how much money you have to spend, maybe what animals you have, or how many animals you want there. And so there's just a whole list of things to know that, it depends, which I think just goes to emphasize the importance of talking with your county agents to come up with that plan. Because, again, like Brenda said, it's the calls where we've already done this that our hands get tied and we can't make suggestions because it's already been done. And now your hands are tied because you can't do anything to fix the problem that you may think you have. But Blake's got something.
Yeah, I did want to. We talked a lot about fescue, and this is just. I'm going to play devil's advocate because down my way we don't grow fescue. But let me tell you something, and I don't like to call out necessarily stores, but these big box stores, some of the ones you can buy bulk things in. All right, you can pick out what the company of your preference. They sell in Pooler, Georgia, tall fescue by the bucket in the summer. And there are a lot of people that are moving into our area that will see that, and they might have been in an area. A lot of people were moving in from the north or in the west and things, and in certain climates they already had fescue. They were using fescue. If that's a readily available product, they're thinking in their head that that's supposed to be what grows here. That is not always the case, and I stress that don't invest in something unless you do your homework on this kind of stuff, especially when it comes to plants, because it don't lie. The kids say ball don't lie when they when there's a foul in basketball. Ball don't lie. Same thing with this. If you plant a plant where it does not belong, it will come. You will see the results of it. It will not be great.
Which I think just deserves the emphasis that let's just say south of Macon, where Blake and I are the southern part of the state. You guys, Brenda and Hailey, are in the northern part. But south of Macon, our winter grazing should be oats, rye, wheat, triticale, ryegrass, and they're all annual things. We don't have any perennial winter grazing or cool season grazing that we recommend. Now, we certainly can recommend some clovers that will come back every year, but again, you don't want a significant amount of those out there. You want it to be in a mix. Now, for summer, we have our Bermudas and our Bahia grasses, and then we can come in with some summer annuals, sorghum Sudans, millets, things like that, crabgrass. I personally would have crabgrass on every acre I have, but you tell some of my farmers that are more row crop people, and they look at you like you're crazy. But that's one of those answers of it depends. So it works out great for us, but we're not row cropping. Same thing with ryegrass. We're not row cropping. But if we have producers that are coming in and planning to plant, or maybe they're dual cropping wheat, grazing it, and then coming in and actually growing it to harvest, then ryegrass is a terrible mix with it. But I do think that being prepared and making that plan and knowing what fits is really the big take homes from this episode is, being prepared to plant it. Now, again, this year we were prepared and it didn't work out quite as well as maybe we thought it should. But at the same time, in the southern part, we still have time, and I certainly hope it's planning on raining soon. But anything else from anybody?
I just know for us, because we're in the middle Georgia area, and I don't know how it is for Brenda or Savannah or Blake, but we have multiple soil types in our county. So not only is it knowing what can grow there based off of the weather, but also understanding, and that's a big thing that NRCS can help with, is they can give a map. They've done it plenty of times to producers, and even one producer might have sandy and one might have clay. And so understanding that this may not grow well here, but this could, and vice versa. We're also very fortunate in my area that everything that Savannah lists out and everything that Brenda lists out, we can grow all of that because we've kind of got that multi-purpose area.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was like, you kind of got best of both worlds. When you're kind of we talk about north-south, there's really that middle Georgia that's its own little thing. But I kind of just wanted to, one last little antidote before we wrap up. And this is one of my local producers. He was our old young farmer director, but he's a cattle producer, and he swore up and down clover does not grow in Effingham County, and we put it to the test. And I'll be honest with you, visually it doesn't grow very well. You would not see it when you mix it up, but even if you don't see some of these these plants, their benefits can go through the roof. It was shown because that mix that had the clover and the rye grass outcompeted everything else, out-yielded all the other mixes that we had. And it was the only one that had the clover. And even though we didn't see that clover's benefit of that nitrogen and those nutritional pieces really did help boost that other grazing that you're putting in that mix. So when you're thinking through your mixes, just because sometimes it might not be visual, you are getting benefits from these plants out there, and it might not be the perfect stand, because he was right. It's a choppy road with clover, hit or miss in Effingham, but it can happen, and it can work, even though you might not see it with your own eyes.
And so I do just want to remind you guys that Extension is here to help, whether that's soil samples, whether it's hay samples. I will tell you, we're talking a lot about grazing. But I do think that the first part of grazing anything is to do two things, and that's to take a soil sample before we plant that grazing. But I do also think it is absolutely critical to take a hay sample for what you're going to be feeding, because the reality of it is we cannot get away in the state of Georgia from relying specifically on grazing. We have to have some sort of hay, and that hay sample that we take and we send off and we know what we're feeding can really alter what we may decide to plant. So remember that sending those samples off is critical to your success. They're so cheap in the grand scheme of things. But that being said, we're going to roll into just the one upcoming event that I have, and that is going to be the Agri-Manager Short Course in Swainsboro on December the 2nd from 8 to 3:15. We're going to be talking about farm management, planning, risk management and marketing, hedging, futures, options, financial management, capital budgeting, and investment analysis, all the things that are critical to being a productive and sustainable agribusiness and farming business. And so we would love to have you there. Please call my office and talk to Miss Lynn and get registered for that event. Again, that's December the 2nd from 8 to 3:15. I promise it's going to be great. A lot of good information with that. And another couple things to keep in mind, our 4-H locations in the southeast side of the state will start their fruit tree sales coming up soon. So you guys should be watching their Facebook pages and getting on their mailing list for those. And then the other thing is there's a lot of commodity commission events that will be coming up at the first of the year. So get the cotton one, the peanut one, the corn short course, things like that on your calendars to be able to go. Fruit and vegetables coming up in January as well. But again, thank you guys for joining us. Remember to stay safe and keep tilling it like it is.
Gas and tipping cash changed the way I see the world. There's still some good in it, and that good is you, girl.